This video has been heavily edited to comply with ShowPro's copyright policies. The original version of this video can be found on BitChute through the link in the description below. The anime has been written into a corner not by the writing staff, but by the games themselves, and this is just something that we're gonna have to deal with for this generation. Fortunately, there's more than enough awesome writing and fun characters to keep our minds off of that, so it is a minor complaint in the grand scheme of things, but still one that should be taken notice of in the future. Whether this version of Ash is a good character or not is still up in the air, since the Sun and Moon anime is far from being over. But I honestly don't see him changing that much or gaining any new and interesting traits to make him stand out. As for right now, while I am definitely enjoying Sun and Moon and the sheer level of fun that it's able to create, I still can't help feeling that we've lost something truly important and fascinating about Ash along the way. Boy, was I fucking wrong. Pokemon Sun and Moon has been by far the most contentious entry into the Pokemon TV series to date, with a significant amount of derision coming from the drastic change in art style, but that topic has already been covered by others who know much more about the actual industry than I do, and I highly suggest those videos. If you don't like the art style, then that's fine, but judging it solely on that without even giving it a shot means that you're going to miss out on one of the most fascinating, exciting, and mature Pokemon stories that's ever been written. Yes, I said mature, and I mean it. And I want to use this video to show just how much Sun and Moon stands out from previous seasons in that regard, as well as how it has evolved into a strong piece of children's media in general. As for where to start with this, I suppose the best place would be where I left off at the end of my Evolution of Ash Ketchum video, which you should definitely watch as a companion piece. Also, I know this has been brought up by commenters in my previous videos, so I guess I'll address it here. For the most part, I'll try to stick to the localized English names for characters in Pokemon, but more than likely I'm going to fall back on the Japanese names because that's what I'm more comfortable saying in most cases. I've watched the Sun and Moon anime way more than I've played the games, so that's just how it's gonna be. To briefly summarize my Ash Ketchum video if you haven't seen it yet, the original 275 episodes of Pokemon provided Ash with a complete and satisfying character arc, going from an incompetent nobody to a standout trainer over the course of 3 different regions. However, with Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Unova choosing to mostly reboot or stagnate his character instead of continue from where he left off, Ash as a protagonist began to grow stale and uninteresting, and as a byproduct, all of the narrative elements around him suffered as well. There is a bit more nuance to how each of those regions fail, but that's a whole other topic that I will definitely be addressing in the future. Fortunately, the anime finally began to learn from its past mistakes with X and Y, featuring a much wiser and stronger Ash both in terms of Pokemon battles and as a person. Which brings us to Sun and Moon, which, to correct what I have said in previous videos, does not significantly distort Ash's character that was steadily built up through X and Y. Rather, despite a few sour moments, it continues this character in a different setting and a slightly different genre. Initially, I was wary that the more slice-of-life setting would lead to the overall series being much less ambitious and thrilling, as there was no constant drive to collect gym badges in order to qualify for that region's respective Pokemon League. However, this could not be further from the truth, as Sun and Moon is just as exciting as X and Y in many regards. Not only that, but the lack of urgency in collecting badges actually works to the show's advantage in portraying what kind of person Ash has become. With the first 6 generations, the formula has always been get some Pokemon and get to the gyms to get the badges so you can get to the tournament at the end. And that structure creates a driving force that naturally pushes the characters forward, even when the series is faced with dozens upon dozens of what are essentially episodic side stories. But that structure doesn't exist in Sun and Moon. There are no gyms, no badges, there isn't even an Alolan Pokemon League yet at the time of writing this script. Yes, they do have the trials and grand trials, but those events don't exist to lead Ash to a greater goal at the end. There's no grand prize or limitless bragging rights for completing the island pilgrimage. You do it because you want to test yourself and discover your own self-worth through a series of exciting and difficult obstacles. That is what prompts Ash to take the pilgrimage, showing us that he doesn't need the formulaic badge and league structure to push beyond his current limits and achieve more than he did the day before. A sign that he's growing into a much more responsible and mature trainer. This actually makes me even more excited at the knowledge that an Alolan League will eventually be formed whenever the series begins to wrap up, as we will see how Ash proceeds in said league's tournament with this new outlook. But it's not just about Pokemon battles either. Really, in hindsight, this whole thing was never just about Pokemon battles. The real test of this show's mettle is how it holds up in between the battles, which I can definitely say Sun and Moon has done far better than any season has ever done before. The sheer variety of different activities that Ash and the others engage in throughout the series is simply astounding from a creative perspective. And as my more veteran followers know, creativity is number one on my list of things I want from storytelling. Be it a treasure hunt, a miniature go-kart race, a pro wrestling match, taming the king of a lake, relaxing at a bar in the middle of the jungle, or just 3 Pokemon getting lost and finding their way back home, almost every new adventure feels fresh and exciting and totally at home in the world that Sun and Moon has created. Life isn't just about one single thing like Pokemon battles. It's about the collective experiences you go through, and seeing Ash respond so positively to each new event further shows how much he's learned. If this were Season 1 Ash, he'd be banging his head against the wall at the thought of having to waste time on something that wouldn't help him get to the next gym battle. But Sun and Moon Ash absolutely revels in these experiences. He's learned to appreciate and enjoy the little things in life and how those things will eventually form a much greater understanding of himself and the world around him. This is something that we got brief teasers of in X and Y, but never in as much force and quantity as in Sun and Moon. Sun and Moon Ash doesn't just love Pokemon and Pokemon battles, Sun and Moon Ash loves life. And that's just really fucking cool. Of course, most of this would have been impossible without another crucial element of Sun and Moon's setting that inadvertently became off-putting to older Pokemon fans before the show even began: school. On a surface level, I can totally understand why including school in Pokemon would irk some people. A lot of the appeal of Pokemon is the fact that these young children can go on amazing adventures without being burdened with the responsibilities of schoolwork. So completely shattering that escapist fantasy could definitely have a lot of drawbacks. However, once again, that is not the case in Sun and Moon, because Professor Kukui is a great teacher. This is a concept that I've been wanting to discuss for a while but haven't had the time to do proper research on, but the past half decade or so has seen a noticeable increase in anime where the school setting actually means something. This has been especially prevalent in Shonen Jump anime like Assassination Classroom, Food Wars, and My Hero Academia, and this concept will hopefully be getting its own video at some point, but we'll stick with Pokemon for now. What I find most interesting about the school in Sun and Moon is that it is in no way an academic learning institution. Textbooks and homework are rarely seen, and most of the lessons are taught out in the field rather than within the confines of the classroom. There are even several moments later in the series where Kukui won't even enter the room until the students have finished important discussions about Pokemon that they're having amongst themselves, showing that Kukui is dedicated to letting his students learn their lessons naturally and give them a guiding hand when need be, rather than force the lessons down their throats. Admittedly, there are a few moments where it does resemble a more stereotypical school structure, and those are the moments where it tends to be much less interesting, but the majority of the time is spent with practical lessons on both Pokemon training and environmental observation. The primary goal of Kukui's teachings appears to be informing Ash and the others of the world they live in and why the Pokemon in their ecosystem behave the way that they do. Kukui understands that most of these kids aren't going to be scholars or technically trained professionals professionals or even top-tier Pokemon trainers, but also that they still need a more fundamental and functional understanding of Pokemon in order to fulfill their dreams properly. One of my favorite examples of this is when they were assigned what was essentially a one-day internship at the local Pokemon Center. While a similar event did occur in the very first series, it was treated mostly as a gag back then. Here, it's actually part of their curriculum. The thing that only Brock and the occasional Nurse Joy had significant knowledge of for over a decade of broadcast is being taught to all of the main characters in a practical manner. This focus on practical employment application is another concept that I've seen popping up a lot recently in anime like Hugto Precure and the Stagiaire arc of Food Wars, and it's a lesson that is sorely needed. More than any Pokemon series before, Sun and Moon touches on a lot of themes and ideas that are essential for growing children to learn, and this extends to its plethora of more complex side characters as well, and how there isn't always a clear-cut, morally obvious choice for responding to some of the people they encounter. As much as I love it for its creativity, the Pokemon TV series has never really been interested in blurring the lines between good and evil, even at its best moments. But this is totally understandable in some respects because doing so runs the risk of being too complex for the audience, which is still comprised primarily of young children. Because of this, most of the characters that have been introduced in the Pokemon anime fall into 4 general categories. Good people who act good, people who make mistakes or are being misled but are still good overall, bad people who are eventually reformed, and villains who stay villains and are meant to be completely unsympathetic. Yes, there is a tiny bit of wiggle room and categorical crossover, but those are the general templates, and it's especially true with recurring characters. Jessie, James, and Meowth are really the only significant characters that have heavily deviated from these categories in the past, and it's usually only when they're in a movie and the world is about to end that they show a more benevolent side. However, all of this changed drastically with Sun and Moon. This is actually something I touched on more specifically with Team Rocket in one of my very first analytical videos, so you can check that out for more details, but to briefly sum it up as well as to expand on it, Team Rocket in Sun and Moon has deviated almost entirely from their usual plans of steal Pikachu and maybe some other Pokemon. They get hyped catching their own personal partners, sell donuts on the side, harkening back to when they would sell fake memorabilia during the Pokemon League, forge relationships with other people and Pokemon in their region, and end up having their own set of goals that have nothing to do with Team Rocket proper, but everything to do with what these 3 want to do. I find the donut stand to be an especially fascinating example of how much these 3 have grown. When they sold fake merch during the Pokemon League, they did it because they wanted to make more money to expand on their schemes, and also because they were usually poor. The donut stand, meanwhile, doesn't seem to be monetarily motivated, at least not solely so, especially because I'm pretty sure they haven't sold a single donut yet. Yes, they think it will bring in money, but not because they see it as a get-rich-quick scheme. While it's not stated directly, using the honey Kitarugama gathered as a glaze for the donuts comes from the fact that they genuinely love the taste of that honey, and so they think that other people will love it and spend money on it. They audibly acknowledge that the fake merch they sell at the League is pure garbage, but are disappointed when something they actually like doesn't sell well. These characters have their own agency outside of their assigned bad guy moniker, and while they do still fulfill said moniker because it's their job and it's in their nature, we've also learned so much more about them as individuals that it actually becomes a bit disappointing to see them fail so much. Sun and Moon's new characters also bring this more nuanced perspective to character building and conflict, one of whom almost feels like a throwback to a character from one of my favorite episodes of the original series. Kuchinashi is a bit of an oddity in the world of Pokemon. He's one of the 4 island kahunas and a member of his local police precinct. Based on that alone, one would assume that he would fall squarely into the good people who are good category of characters. However, Sun and Moon had something else in store, as exemplified by his preference for dark-type Pokemon. Occupations aside, Kuchinashi is, well, kind of an asshole. He constantly tries to shirk both his kahuna duties and his police officer ones, and in general seems annoyed by most of the people he meets, especially Ash and his unbridled optimism. He also appears to have ties to Team Rocket, Giovanni in particular, and is possibly still involved in crime to some extent, as indicated by his willingness to provide Jesse and James with a means to further their own Pokemon stealing endeavors. However, he's also not a complete asshole either. We're shown occasional glimmers of a more benevolent personality every so often, especially through his interactions with Acerola, but not enough to say that he's a good person overall. Even after Ash eventually proves his worth and earns his shot at the grand trial, Kuchinashi ends up taunting him and his Lugarugon throughout the entire match, hoping to cause a slip-up that will allow him to end the match quickly so he can go back to not doing anything. In hindsight, Kuchinashi reminds me a lot of Lieutenant Surge, the third gym leader of the Kanto region. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this, just hang on. After earning the trust and respect of both Brock and Misty, and even gaining their company as traveling companions, Surge was a huge wake-up call to Ash that he shouldn't get too comfortable and assume that everyone's going to be nice and civil like his friends are. Surge is unquestionably a huge prick. He looks down on Ash as soon as he enters the gym and constantly berates him for having such a scrawny looking Pikachu as his partner, inferring in no uncertain terms that the massive power of his Raichu is the superior fighting method. And initially he ends up proving his point by completely destroying Ash in their first match, much like how Ash's first match with Kuchinashi ends in failure because of his inability to control Lugarugon. However, there's one major difference between Surge and Kuchinashi, even though both of these stories end with Ash being victorious. When Ash finally defeats Surge by using Pikachu's speed and agility to outmaneuver Raichu, Surge ends up softening up a bit towards him. He realizes that he's made a mistake and that he might need to change something about himself before he ends up on a losing streak, placing him firmly in the bad guys who get reformed character category. Kuchinashi, however, doesn't change after Ash defeats him. There's no grand revelation that totally changes how he views Pokemon battles. The thematic message of this match was solely based on Ash's relationship with Lugarugon and his ability to trust in his Pokemon. Kuchinashi just happens to be a great catalyst for this conflict because his personality clashes so heavily with Ash's, but there's no need for that personality to change at the end. And I find it really fascinating that a kids show would suggest this idea that sometimes a person can just be kind of an asshole, and that there's not really much you can do about it other than continue pushing forward with your own life. Ash never berates Kuchinashi for being a bad person, he just gets over it and moves on. A rather bold move for a series that has often been so vehemently black and white with its morals, but that's what makes it so interesting. Then there's the case of Lily's mother, Lusamine. Much like in the games, Lusamine falls squarely into the bad mom archetype. However, the anime's version is much more complex and conflicted. Lusamine is definitely not a Ragyo Kiryuin type in any regard. She really does love Lily and Gladio and cares deeply for them. This overly affectionate attitude isn't a front to hide a darker side, it's a genuine emotion that she's compelled to express whenever she actually gets to be with her children. But Lusamine is also intensely invested in her Ultra Beast research. It's something she's spent her entire professional career on, and at first, is something she's unwilling to compromise for anything. And it's when those two interests start to have some crossover that we start to see the true internal struggle in Lusamine's character. As the head of the Aether Foundation, she often ends up choosing her work over her children. Not in a malevolent, I don't care about them way, but rather in an obsessive, it's more important that I do this way. A much more subtle look at emotional child neglect. And the more she indulges in this mindset, the harder and harder it is for her to make time for her other passion, spending time with her kids. And slowly but surely, this begins to cause a rift between Lusamine and her children, though mostly on Lily and Gladio's side. This idea is briefly touched on by Gladio when he suggests that his mother's obsession with the Ultra Beasts overrode her maternal intuition when Lily wasn't able to touch Pokemon after being attacked by an Ultra Beast. Even though Salvo kept this a secret from Lusamine, Gladio suggests that she wasn't able to address Lily's trauma because she had become obsessed with her research. She claims to love her children, and she really does overall, but she can't seem to fully understand them, and debatably understandably doesn't even try that much because she's so wrapped up in her research. Thus, it is only fitting that Lucimine is given a chance at redemption by allowing the Ultra Beast Nihilego to capture her instead of Lily, thus setting up the Ultra Space mini-arc to come. Now, in a less ambitious story, Lily would rescue her mom from the Ultra Beast and that would be the end of it. But as you've probably figured out by now, Sun and Moon is quite the ambitious project. Going back to that part about Lucimine not really having time for her children, it wasn't just Gladio who was openly combative with his mother over that point. Lily is shown to be just as troubled by this, and the fact that she seems to currently have more contact with her mother than Gladio only exacerbates the issue. There are many moments in the series where Lily seems outright annoyed or even angry with her mother because she can't seem to balance her work and personal life, which is to be expected to a certain extent, but the uncomfortable and even combative attitude that sometimes arises from their interactions adds much needed depth and tension to their relationship. While Lily does eventually save Lucimine, it's not in the final boss battle manner that is typically expected. When Lily confronts Lucimine in Ultra Space, the Nihilego that abducted her has begun to take control of her mind by feeding off of Lucimine's obsession with researching Ultra Beasts, and so she refuses to go home with Lily and throws a temper tantrum like she's a child. This prompts Lily to completely unload on her mother for her incredibly childish behavior, not just now, but throughout the series so far. This eventually convinces Lucimine that she needs to make some serious changes in her life, both for her children and for herself, and thus is able to free herself from the Nihilego's control. I'm sure that the bad parent conflict isn't entirely new to the Pokemon anime, but never before has it been presented with such nuance on both sides and over such a long period of time, allowing the situation to really settle on the viewers and let us see how much it has affected everyone involved. Lucimine's character arc essentially lasts through 11 episodes, with the groundwork being laid well before that through the beginning of Lily's arc, and encompasses a variety of different viewpoints to create a much more realistic parent-child dynamic to set it apart from any that have come before. They took what was essentially a primary antagonist in the games and turned her into a deeply flawed protagonist. This arc centering around Lily and Lucimine is a strong example of how Sun and Moon chooses to go above and beyond when it comes to addressing more complex issues that its viewers might face in their own lives. Which brings us to the final and possibly most striking concept of this series, a concept that separates a good show from a great show just by how it's handled, the concept of death. Now, if you've made it this far into the video and still haven't seen Sun and Moon yet, this is the part where I really want to throw the big spoiler warnings on, because these parts of the show are best enjoyed knowing as little as possible. I highly suggest trying out the episodes displayed on screen right now, as they provide an entire arc relating to the death of a certain character. Or better yet, maybe just check out episode 79 by itself, which gives an entirely different perspective on the topic. Or just go watch the series right now, so that you can catch up. Either way, I'm going to be spoiling all of those episodes I just mentioned, so let's continue. The idea of death has never really been a tangible thing in the Pokemon TV series. Sure, there were plenty of situations where people or Pokemon almost died, but until now there has never been an on-screen or even in-episode death in the TV series. The movies have dabbled in this quite a bit, but it's almost always in an action movie context where death is a sacrifice to allow others to live. Which is fine, but not exactly revolutionary, even in children's media. There have also been examples of deaths that occurred in the past that the characters have already gotten over, which again is fine, but isn't really anything out of the ordinary. So, let's talk about Litten and Stoutland. In Sun and Moon, Litten is a stray Pokemon that is often seen wandering around in the marketplace, picking up food wherever it can. In episode 7, it's revealed that Litten has been taking this food to a sick Stoutland. In the past, Litten was just a lonely stray with no direction in life, and so Stoutland decided to look after Litten and teach it how to fend for itself. However, as time went on, Stoutland grew older and older, and now barely has the strength to even make it off of the couch on which it sleeps. And then, Episode 21 happens. The day seems to go on as usual, with Stoutland teaching Litten how to battle as best it can. Then, as the episode wears on, Stoutland collapses, appearing to be in significant pain. Ash helps him to the Pokemon Center where he learns the truth about the situation from Nurse Joy. Stoutland is old. He's not injured or sick, but that doesn't mean that time isn't wearing on. Just as the tree by Stoutland's bed slowly sheds its last leaves, so too does Stoutland's time grow thin. Eventually, Stoutland and Litten return to their home for more training and a more comfortable rest, and then, the next morning, Stoutland is gone. No one knows where he went, but as the last leaf falls from the tree, there is no doubt of his fate. Even coming back to this episode over a year later, I still can't stop myself from tearing up while watching it because it so accurately captures what losing a loved one feels like. The slow, often painful process of aging, the confusion and sadness that hits when their time finally comes, the urge to make sure that those you leave behind will be safe and secure, even at the cost of the few more days you might have had otherwise. It's such a well-constructed idea that even Meowth's borderline obnoxious singing filled with empathy and emotion evokes a sense of bittersweet resolution as Litten finds the strength to move on. Pokemon has always been a good piece of children's media, but for me, this was the moment when it became a great one. One with the power to be both an entertaining adventure and a strong moral compass. But of course, as I've already said many times in this video, Sun and Moon is never content to rest on its laurels. And this brings us to episode 79. In this episode, Ash and friends visit Mamane's older brother at the observatory on Ula Ula Island. There they plan to observe a meteor shower, which turns out to be a group of Metino falling from the sky. As the Metino shed their shells and float back up to the stars, Bavenom finds one that was unable to come out of its shell, and so they take it back to the lab with them. Once it eventually emerges, Bavenom and the others spend the whole next day playing with their new friend. However, as the episode goes on, we see brief flashes from Mamane's past and a sad memory that appears to have been repressed, indicating that this probably isn't going to go the same way their other adventures have in the past. As the second bout of the Metino shower begins, Ash and the others learn that falling to Earth from space is not just something that Metino do now and then, but is in fact the end of their life cycle. When a Metino loses its shell, it eventually fades away, returning back to the space dust that it once consumed. Ash asks Professor Kukui if there's anything they can do to help the Metino, but Kukui responds that this is just how they are. This is part of the natural order, and it's something that we can only observe and remember, passing on memories of these encounters so that they are not forgotten. Death is sad, but it's also a natural part of life, an extremely important lesson for children to learn before they have to face it in their own lives. In my nearly 20 years as a Pokemon fan, I thought I saw pretty much everything this franchise had to offer. I saw its exciting cultural highs, I saw its painfully boring lows, and I even got to see its chance at rebirth. But never before has this series been able to impact me so deeply and thoroughly as Sun and Moon has done so far. Not every episode is a 10 out of 10, but it has by far the best high moments and the most interesting ideas that the series has ever had. And I'm so unbelievably grateful that this franchise has been able to continue on to see these new heights with its more mature outlook on storytelling. And the best part of all is that it hasn't sacrificed what makes Pokemon Pokemon. The adventures are still exciting, the characters are still fun and endearing, and the battles are some of the best that the series has ever had. This is still Pokemon, but with a more complex and mature outlook on life. As for what's next, I can only imagine that it's going to get even more interesting from here. I'm not exactly sure how, and I'm sure there's a ton of surprises still left in store, but for now, all I want to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy more of what I can now undoubtedly say is my favorite media franchise of all time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Sorry this video took so long to make. The script just kept getting longer and longer the more I thought about the central concept, and I didn't even finish the rough draft until the morning of Anime Midwest, so I had to let it sit for a whole weekend after that. But I'm so happy that it's finally out and very proud of it for being what, if I estimated correctly, is now my longest video to date. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, be sure to like and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all my latest content. And check out this playlist of all the Pokemon content I've made for this channel. Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourke Tinjoin, Christine Seibert, Tim Johnson, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.